Listen, the first thing I want to do, Cathaoirleach, is I want to commend the Minister and the staff in his department for producing this very fine piece of work. Trying to put together a large piece of legislation is no easy task. Not only have you got to set out in a coherent format what you want to achieve, but you've also got to do that by making sure it's consistent with the law that exists at present. So this is no easy task, and in fact I'm surprised that the Minister has managed to get it onto the floor of the Dáil so quickly. Obviously, because it's such a huge piece of work, we need to give it careful scrutiny. And I think a huge amount of work will be done at committee stage. And I think the most important thing is to get it right as opposed to getting it enacted immediately. But I would like to say I'd like to see this legislation enacted this year. I think it's also important that we're aware as to what's the purpose of this legislation. The purpose is not simply to try to reformulate or represent our electoral laws. The purpose is to defend our democracy. And I think we need to really focus on that when we're talking about the principles and the sections of this bill in this House today and when it gets to committee stage. When you think of democracy, it is a very young form of governance throughout the world. 150 years ago, very few places around the world had democracy. If you look around the world today, we assume that democracy is going to be prevalent throughout the world in years to come. That's not the case. We can see that there are huge numbers of powerful and significant countries around the world that don't exercise or operate democracy. You look at countries such as China. You see countries such as Russia, which purport to exercise democracy, but we don't know that they don't exercise democracy in the same way as we understand it in this country. And of course, there are many countries where there are still absolute rulers, whereby they inherit their role from previous family members, and they rule over their countries as well. We don't want that form of governance in Ireland. The way the people of Ireland want to ensure that their government and politics operates is that they want the ability to vote in governments and they want the ability to vote out governments. I also think we need to appreciate that in recent times there have been very significant threats to democracies in countries that we assume democracy is safe. We all had an opportunity to appraise what happened in Brexit. We don't really understand the full forces that were at play there, but we do know for certain that outside parties exerted significant influence in the United Kingdom in the lead up to that vote. We also saw the same in the United States, where online activity and interference from outside and other countries can have a significant impact. I suppose the biggest threat to democracy in the world today doesn't come specifically from other countries, but it comes from the mediums and the technology that's available now for people who want to influence democracy in their own direction and in their own beneficial way. If you think about it, when you look at what can be done online now, huge numbers of people can be affected and swayed to think or to vote in certain ways as a result of online activity. Many people, I regret to say, outsource their thinking now to what they see and hear online. It's a hugely powerful medium. The online activity, when it comes to the political realm, really needs to be regulated, and I commend the Minister for including a section in this piece of legislation that's going to deal with the regulation of online advertising. The Electoral Commission, when it's established, I want to see that as a vibrant, active body that really recognises its primary function is to protect and enhance Irish democracy. I welcome the fact, Minister, that you've indicated that the chairperson of the Electoral Commission is going to be a judge. I don't say that out of any deference to judges, but I do think in Ireland that the public do have a level of trust in the judiciary which may not exist with other sectors of society. So if they see that the Electoral Commission is being chaired by a sitting judge or a retired judge, I think that will give a general sense of confidence to the Irish public that this is an independent and impartial body. I've also looked, Minister, at Section 9 when you're talking about the recommendations that can be made for membership of the ordinary members of the Commission. You know, I hope we'll have people on that Commission who will have a practical understanding of politics. You know, I'm not talking necessarily that they have to be professors of politics in universities or other third-level institutions, although that would help. I also think we shouldn't downplay the expertise that exists in this House and that exists in the Seanad. Sometimes we're very hesitant about putting forward politicians or former politicians to play important independent roles. Obviously, when we're in this House and we're members of political parties, or even if we're purportedly independent, we don't come with that level of independence that's required for objective assessment of the operation of the Electoral Commission. But I've no doubt that once members leave this House, that they do have that ability to exercise independence, and they'll be able to do so in the knowledge of how politics practically operates on the ground. There's a number of other matters in it as well, Minister, I thought were interesting. There's a provision in it for anonymous electors. Now, maybe I need to read the explanatory memo more, but I couldn't understand at the outset what type of application would justify a person being able to be granted the status of anonymous electors. It may be the case that there are people who have very sensitive jobs or don't want to have their details recorded on the register, but I think that's something that I no doubt you'll explain in due course as it goes through committee stage. Listen, the Electoral Register itself is in a very significantly bad condition. I know in my own constituency, and this may be the same in yours as well, Minister, but there's a huge number of people who have flats in my constituency and then they move on and necessarily they don't take their names off the Electoral Register. That's why I believe that when it comes to elections, the turnout in my constituency sometimes looks pretty low. In fact, I suspect the reason for it is that there are many people who are on the register who actually just aren't there anymore, who aren't voting. And I think we need to clean up the electoral register so that we can get a proper appraisal of what is the actual turnout in elections. Part of the reason why apathy can spread in politics is if people think, actually, not many people are bothering to vote. That's a terrible thing to hear somebody say, that they're not going to bother to vote because they look and they see that a significant body of people aren't voting. If we have a system whereby the Electoral Register doesn't accurately record turnout, well then that's just going to breed that level of apathy. I also welcome the fact that we're going to have a provision whereby people are going to get on to a sort of a stepping stone register. People of the ages of 16 and 17 will know that when they get to 18 they'll be on the register. Many people in the House have spoken about how we should give the vote to people who are 16 years of age. I remain open to have a discussion about that. The Constitution obviously says that you have to be 18 to vote. We'd have to have a referendum in respect of it. But listen, if we want to go down that route, the way to do it is let's try it in local elections in the first instance, rather than working immediately into seeing whether or not we should change the Constitution. I also want to deal with the issue, Minister, of advocacy work and the definition of political purposes. And I saw you earlier, nodding that you were going to give consideration to this when the matter goes on to committee stage. It's a difficult issue, but I think we do need to appreciate that there are many bodies in Irish society, many groups of residents that come together to advocate a particular issue. They don't believe they're involved in political activity. They don't believe they're involved in something that's going to require regulation by the Electoral Commission. But it may be the case that if they're involved in something that comes broadly within the definition of political purposes, that they then need to register. I just think we need to be sure that we don't completely over-regulate this sphere, because that will have a negative impact in terms of what we're trying to do, and what we're trying to do is to protect and to enhance democracy. Another thing, I suppose, I was listening to Deputy Farrell there talking about whether we should be closing schools for the purpose of elections. There's no reason, of course, why we can't have elections on a Saturday. We had it the last time. I think it worked. It didn't appear to increase turnout that much. Similarly, however, it didn't appear to reduce it that much. So if possible, I think maybe we should do, as is done in other countries, such as in France this weekend, let's have our elections at a weekend and we don't interfere with schooling of children. We also should note, obviously, under the Constitution, there's a 7-year electoral cycle by legislation that's provided that there must be an election every 5 years. I think that's an issue that the Electoral Commissioner are going to have to deal with as well, and whether they think it is appropriate or necessary that we should amend our Constitution so that it expressly states there must be an election every 5 years. Finally, there's a couple of difficult issues, Minister, that I don't think you can shy away from, and I think you're going to have to deal with. Obviously, we operate on an island where there are 2 jurisdictions. We have funding of political parties in the southern jurisdiction that's different to the northern jurisdiction. It is now going to be increasingly the case that parties in both jurisdictions will engage in political activity on both sides. Hopefully that's something that our own party is going to do in due course. But I think we need to ensure that there's some consistency and protection there when it comes to the regulation of political funding. If you're going to contest an election in Dáil Éireann, I think all aspects of your political funding have to be disclosed and should be available for public inspection. I don't make that comment about any one particular party. It applies to all of us here. If you're raising money in a different jurisdiction and you're running in an election here, that information must be disclosed. What will protect our democracy is information. And if you look at the information that we can provide already, there's details about donations that are made, there's details about expenditure. We all have to put in electoral reforms after an election. All that information is very useful. And I don't think it inconveniences members of the House, but it does provide the public with confidence that our political system is operating above board. If we don't do that, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where there'll be parts of our political system that the public may perceive incorrectly are being hidden from them. Finally, Minister, it's a fantastic piece of work, but I want to put another piece of work on your plate as well, and that is that the electoral acts are all over the place, the 97 Act, another act. At some stage we're going to have to compile them all together for the sake not just of people in this House, but for members of the public, so that they can pick up the one Bible, which is their Electoral Act and their Electoral Reform Act together, and they'll find out from A to Z what is and is not permitted when it comes to contesting elections in Ireland. Listen, we have a great democracy in this country. People fought and died for it. We should value it and we should ensure that we preserve it. And once again, Minister, I want to commend you and the people in your department for preparing this legislation. Thanks very much, Cathaoirleach.